I'm Frank Dean. I'm from Marion, North Carolina. I'm a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel. Spent 29 years in the service. Of that 29 years, 3 was on active duty, and the other 26 was in the reserve component. But I was in the most active reserve unit in the Army. We were worldwide in scope. We were an airborne unit. And I actually started parachuting at a very late age, relatively speaking. Because when you're looking at 81, 47 is young. They were looking for senior field grade officers that were either jump qualified or willing to go to jump school. And I said, well, I've always wanted to go to jump school. So I made my first jump on my 47th birthday. By the time I retired at 52, I was a senior parachutist in the American and German Army with jump wings from England, Dutch, Belgium, Thailand, and South Africa. I had an interesting career. Now, my involvement with Rotary and how we got into the wheelchair business. I've been a Rotarian for almost 40 years. I have made over a dozen international trips into third world countries, primarily delivering wheelchairs. And I'm a big believer in divine intervention. So when I tell you these stories and how everything falls into place, it just doesn't, I don't buy the coincidence thing. Well, I was back in 2003. I had gone to a installation banquet for an incoming governor, of which I was going to be an assistant governor for him. And the gentleman that had been the governor the year I was president of the Marion Club said, Frank, we raised more money than any other district in the world, enough for 2 containers of wheelchairs. And at that time they were about $49,000 a piece for 260. And they said, the problem is, Dennis doesn't know where to send the second container of wheelchairs. He said, the first one's going to Guatemala, but if you put a container of wheelchairs in a warehouse in a third world country, they'll just find a way of evaporating. So I went up to Dennis and I said, can I have that second container of wheelchairs? And he said, where are you going with them? I said, Bogota, Colombia, because I'd been to Bogota in 1998, and it was a rough place at that particular point in time. We had an armed guard with us all the time. We were working a project down in the slums, building them a medical facility. Anyway, he said, let me call the people at the Wheelchair Foundation. He did. John Grant said, nobody goes to Colombia. And he said, I got a guy that'll take them in. He said, if you've got a guy that'll take them in, they're yours. And so I had one other fellow approach me and said, Frank, how many are you going to take in on your team? I think I'd like to go. I said, well, Tony, he was a past governor. I said, Tony, I'll take you. Other than that, I'm going by myself because I don't know what I'm going into. And Tony had been an original member of Special Forces, so the two of us went down there. Now, Mark Twain made what I consider one of the best quotes I've ever heard, and that is, 2 most important days in your life: the day you were born and the day you find out why. Well, I found out my why in Bogota, Colombia. We went to a hospital in an auditorium. Recipients are on this, in the walkway, midway up the stairs. And so 3 soldiers bring this soldier in. He's got his right leg blown off at the knee, pin in his right arm. And I finished my presentation and I said, is that man a soldier up there? And they said, yes, sir, he is. I said, well, from one soldier to another soldier, I want you to accept that wheelchair as my personal gift to you. And you could have heard a pin drop in place. They said, sir, the man would like to thank you. The picture they took, you can only see my hand. but the look of endearment, priceless. That's when I found out my why. Well, one thing leads to another thing and to another thing, and then all of a sudden I find out that my purpose and why I'm here is because of wheelchairs. Now, I've done over a dozen. I've been into places where no human should live, and it's just my passion. The number's well up over 5,000 that I've been involved with. And then...
Yeah, tell me some of the countries that you've been to on the distributions, because you've been in varied places, yeah?
Colombia 4 times, Nicaragua 4 times, Guatemala, Mexico, Philippines, Caribbean, and but the one on the Ukraine operation, which I consider is kind of like the icing on the cake, it occurred the first Sunday in April of the year 2002. Russia had attacked Ukraine, and so Charles Pelly was going to be filming in a hospital, a children's hospital that had come under attack. And this young man and woman come in, and their 4-year-old daughter is in a light blue blood-soaked blanket. Child dies. It shows the mother kissing the head of the child and then putting the blanket back over her head. It brought tears to my eyes, and it made me determine that I was going to do something. Well, here comes the divine intervention part. The next day, Chip Cross, who was going to be the incoming president of our club, called and said, "Frank, would you support us packaging another 100,000 meals for the Ukraine?" Because about 4 to 6 months earlier, we had done that as a club. And I said, no. I said, what I will support is 1 million meals. And so that's where the 1 million meal march for Ukraine came from. And it was a $170,000 project. We packaged 1,080,000 meals that all went to the Ukraine. Now, I was collecting monies to go to Ecuador for wheelchair distribution. Now, my wife and I have been married, end of August, be 57 years. She's the only person in the world that understands me, because I wouldn't trade my life with anyone. It's been an adventure from the very beginning. We enjoy 2 cups of coffee in bed every morning. And so we're laying there, and I call my wife Dean. First name is Glenda, but it's a term of endearment. I said, Dean, I'm not supposed to go to Ecuador. She said, well, where are you supposed to go? I said, Ukraine. She said, what are you going to do if something happens to you over there? I said, I'll see you on the other side. And now, at this particular point, we didn't really have any significant amount of money. Didn't have the team selected. Now, my son and I and Dennis Myers, Dennis and I were tent mates together during Desert Storm. He has been on 7 distributions with me. Anyway, Dennis calls me and said, Frank, you got one more water jump in you? I said, sure. So he, my son Carl, and myself went to Lake Doral, Florida, jumped out of a C-47 that had been part of the Normandy invasion. Coolest jump I've ever made. So I have a friend in Morganton that we're cut from the same sheet of cloth. And so I sent him a copy of the video that they have done. I said, George, I'm putting together a team to go to the Ukraine. Now, I'm very selective about who is going on this operation. I said, but I'll take you. he came back and said, I'm in, and I'm not going to tell you what he wrote the check for, but it got us off the launch pad in a huge way. Then, good friend that's a doctor, he said, Frank, I'd love to go to the Ukraine on this. And I said, well, Mark, match my pledge. And he said, how much is it? And I told him. He didn't flinch. He said, okay. I said, you're in. He said, by the way, I've got a friend that I ride bikes with that is a linguist, speaks 5 Slavic languages. I said, well, I'll be dang. So then we added Dwight to the team. And Mark tickled me one day. He said, Frank, he said, I just hope that I can contribute to this. I said, Mark, we catch an incoming round, you're going to be the number 1 man. And so we put our team together. We had 6 of us. We went in and of course, Neil, without your contribution to this effort and the contacts that we made in country. But the thing about George is that I didn't know his daughter had adopted 4 severely handicapped Ukrainian children. Now, Neil provided us with the contacts and leave, and so George takes his wife and daughter to leave, laying out our groundwork for the operation. He meets the gentleman at the warehouse, but he says the warehouse not big enough to accommodate our 240 wheelchairs. And so he said, but I've got a friend that's a past governor that lives in Kyiv. So he got us in touch with Sergey. Sergey, godsend on this operation. I mean, he took care of everything in country. And so anyway, the logistics began to fall into place. I had a $14,000 district grant, and the foundation chairman calls me and says, Frank, you've got to have those wheelchairs in Poland by the middle of June, or I've got to turn the money back into Rotary International. And I said, logistically impossible. And he said, well, I can't get an extension. I said, turn the money back in. I said, raising $14,000 for wheelchairs is not even a challenge. And so I said, we march without you. He said, you mean you're turning the grant in? I said, yes. I said, have a nice day. By the way, we are good friends. And I really wanted to tell him where to stick that grant, but I didn't. And so it, one thing just led to another, and I will say, once we got into country, it was priceless. But the trip going in and the trip coming out were trips from hell. I mean, just won't even get into that part of it. But I wouldn't. The devastation that's taking place in Ukraine right now. Before this operation started, Ukraine was nothing more than just another country halfway around the world. Now, they're my friends. And I'm going to do everything I can humanly do as an individual. Rotary is one of the most powerful humanitarian organizations on the face of the earth. My role in life is connecting dots. And it is through Rotary and through so many great people in this world that want to see this come to an end. I'm just fortunate enough to be blessed to be part of it.